Hello and welcome. Today we're diving into a selection of excerpts from the Quran. Now, we're not going to be able to cover everything, of course, but the goal here is to take a thematic journey to really understand some of its core messages on belief, on life, and what comes next, using the text itself as our guide.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the absolute foundation of the faith. Then we'll see how that belief actually translates into action. From there, we'll look at some powerful lessons from history, and finally, we'll explore the big ideas about this life and the next.
All right, so let's start at the very heart of the message, the nature of God and the essence of faith. This is the central pillar that everything else is really built on.
This passage here, it's famously known as the throne verse, and it's just one of the most powerful descriptions of God you'll find. It establishes this absolute, singular divinity. He's eternal, all-knowing, all-powerful. His authority is just beyond our human comprehension. It's really the definitive statement on the oneness of God.
So right away, the text sets up this really sharp contrast. On one side, you have sincere belief. But on the other, it talks about those who, even though they hear and understand the message, they choose to distort it knowingly, or they act out of feelings like envy. It really hammers home how much intention and sincerity matter in faith.
And this all boils down to one crucial concept, Tawheed. That's the theological term for this absolute, indivisible oneness of God. See, it's not just about believing in one God. It's about understanding that this oneness is the central truth of everything. This idea is absolutely foundational to everything else we're going to talk about.
Okay, so if the core belief is the oneness of God, what does that actually look like in day-to-day life, right? This next section gets into the practical guidance for how to create a just and a compassionate society.
This is such a fascinating blueprint for a community. It's not just about, being pious on your own. Notice the focus on everyone together, spending from what you love, not just your leftovers for charity, making sure there's economic fairness, and this idea of a collective responsibility to encourage good and stand against what's wrong. And I love this last point, this call for balance. Work for the hereafter, for sure, but don't completely check out of this world. Now, to really get that last point about economic justice, we've got to pause and understand this term, riba. You'll often see it translated as usury or interest. Basically, the concept forbids profiting from loans by charging a preset extra amount. The text puts this in direct contrast with charity, which is seen as something that helps society grow and thrive.
So according to these passages, what does the journey of a believer actually look like? Well, this slide kind of breaks it down into clear actions. It all starts with the basics, worship and charity. Then it moves into a state of mind, fearing none but God. From there, it's about obedience, and finally, it lands on this really deep internal quality of patience, sticking with it for the right reasons.
The text isn't just a rule book. A huge part of it is teaching through stories. These excerpts pull heavily from the history of earlier prophets and entire civilizations, using their experiences to teach some really powerful moral and spiritual lessons.
Wow, this quote, it just hits you, right? It's from the story of Musa, or Moses, and it's a huge lesson in faith and courage, or, well, the lack of it. His people, right after being saved, they get to this crucial moment and just hesitate. They basically say, "You go on ahead, we'll just wait here." It serves as this really stark warning about how important it is to actually act on your beliefs.
And the text is just filled with these amazing snapshots. You've got Suleiman, that's Solomon, who had this incredible kingdom, which reminds us that any power we have is a gift. Then there's Noah, and his story of deliverance. You have Abraham, who had the courage to question the traditions of his own people. And of course, Joseph, whose time in prison becomes this incredible test of patience. These aren't just fairy tales, they're like case studies of faith in action.
And connecting all of these stories is this really powerful, kind of sobering warning that comes up again and again. The text talks about entire civilizations that were destroyed because they became arrogant and proud. The imagery is so strong. These empty ruins that are just a silent reminder of what happens when people become unjust and forget where they came from.
All right, so this brings us to the ultimate destination. All of the beliefs, the actions, the lessons from history, they're all pointing towards a bigger context. What is the purpose of this temporary life we're living, especially in relation to a permanent hereafter?
This is just such a vivid metaphor, isn't it? Worldly life, with all its beauty, is compared to lush green plants that shoot up after it rains. And people might look at it and think they're in control. But then, just as quickly, it can all be turned into dry, dead stubble, as if it was never even there. The message is crystal clear.
The things of this world are beautiful, but they are so fleeting.
So following right on that idea of life's temporary nature, the text presents a really clear picture of two different outcomes, two different destinies. Your actions in this world, they have direct and eternal consequences. For those who are righteous, there's a promise of gardens to dwell in. But for the unjust, the warning is severe, a doubled punishment and being counted among the worst losers.
And this just illustrates the dramatic, cosmic scale of the end. The text describes this whole sequence of cataclysmic events, a trumpet blast, the earth and mountains literally being crushed, the sky itself splitting apart. This isn't just an ending, it's a complete remaking of reality, all leading up to this moment, where every generation that ever lived is gathered together for a final judgment.
So when you put it all together, what do you have? You have this framework of ideas, one indivisible God, a faith that's meant to be lived out through justice and compassion, lessons that we can learn from the past, and this very clear sense of purpose and accountability. And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. How does this ancient guidance speak to the very modern, very complex questions we all face today about our own purpose, our communities, and our sense of justice?